Canada Day will be here before you know it, and with Alberta moving back to stage 3, it'll seem like the province will finally be getting back to some sort of a normal feeling here. To discuss this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Tyler, the NDPs say we're opening a little too fast, but the UCPs say the opposition is ignoring the science. Either way, case counts are a lot lower, vaccination rates are about, 70%?
Yeah, that was the threshold we needed to hit in order to go into this next phase of reopening, and that'll start to see restrictions dropping off. Some things are going to remain in place. You'll still have to wear a mask in a taxi, for example, or on a bus, transit bus. But a lot of the other stuff is changing in terms of occupancy restrictions, gathering sizes. You can have your friends over without any concerns now. So it's so amazing to think that we're all so looking forward to going back to normal. It's like, ooh, normal. It feels like it ought to be hard to get excited about.
We can have a
But you've
barbecue
got
again,
to.
is what you're saying, right? A nice barbecue.
Well, yeah,
Sure.
yeah, you can do whatever you want, practically,
Yeah.
within the other laws that exist. Um, and so Rachel Notley and the NDP are a little bit concerned, as sort of as opposition parties are everywhere about this, whether or not, because Alberta is sort of the first major jurisdiction to be going forward with this. Um, so this saying, look, there are variant cases out there. Our vaccination rates are high, but that's first dose vaccinations, not necessarily second. So there's a little bit of concern there. And then the UCP is sort of turning around and saying that, this is the party of doom and gloom, and they're always seeing bad weather on the horizon, sort of thing. So for better or worse, time will sort of tell. But all the metrics look pretty good right now, with Canada Day not that far off.
Yeah, we're all looking forward to it, absolutely. Maybe a few fireworks at the same time, too, to celebrate our country's birthday, right? Yeah. Now, Premier Kenney says $8 million, Tyler, will be going to fund the search grounds of residential schools across the province. This comes on the heels of the discovery of 215 graves at a residential school site in Kamloops, BC.
Right. So this is work that is also going on in multiple other jurisdictions. What Jason Kenney announced Wednesday is an $8 million grant fund. This money will be available for groups that want to do the searches and things like that. Now, they'll be able to apply by, I believe it's the end of January next year, so 2022, and they can get $150,000, and that could be for doing these searches. It could be for erecting a memorial or something like that. It could be for, sort of hiring people to do some of the scientific work on it. And the Institute for Prairie and Indigenous Archaeology at the University of Alberta, which sort of specializes in similar kinds of work to this, they have also sort of offered to volunteer to help on this. But either way, big news. Big news considering just an announcement from the province about this. So we'll have to see what comes of this in the weeks and months to come.
And the nice thing as well, Tyler, is the fact that the province will be working with a lot of the elders from different Indigenous groups as well to ensure that these grave sites are properly respected at the same time, if there's going to be any excavation or maybe even monuments put up at the same time, right?
Yes, that's right. And the other thing I neglected to mention is that this grant money will be given over to Indigenous organizations, and they'll be the ones who sort of administer the distribution of the funds. So it's sort of they're putting this money out there and it's available, and it doesn't seem like there'll be a considerable deal of government involvement in it, unless sort of otherwise asked.
Now, the eligibility for critical workers benefits has expanded in our province. The $1,200 payments now include farm workers. Employers can even apply on behalf of their employees. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so this is the program that's been around sort of throughout the pandemic, and primarily in the first phase of the program, it was for teachers and nurses, and I believe some also sort of low wage essential workers who are in, say, convenience stores or pharmacies or grocery stores. And there's been an expansion of this program, and it's actually quite wide ranging, the occupations that are eligible for it. But I figured, Lethbridge audience, it's probably of note that agricultural workers of all sorts will be eligible. But it includes things like truck drivers, security guards, janitors, a whole pile of people who are, essential to the continuing function of the province. Now, the rules are sort of a little bit stringent, perhaps, depending on how people have worked in the past year. I believe you need to have reached 300 hours of work And you also need to be making less, I believe, than $25 an hour. So some people will become ineligible based on some of the other requirements, but certainly a very large expansion of this program.
Let's talk now about the vaccine or the open for summer lottery that's expanding. You know, when I first heard about this, it reminded me of the car manufacturers that are having a tough time selling a certain make and model of car, so they're offering cashback rebates, you know, 10, 20, $30,000. Seems like that with the lottery right now. You've got three $1 million prizes, there are travel perks, Calgary Stampede prize packs, and the province keeps incentivizing more and more Albertans to get the shot.
Yeah, and some of the research seems to suggest that this really does work. This sort of psychology of reward does sort of convince people to go out and get a shot that they may, not think about that much, may not be that keen on. But as you say, I mean, it's a big pile of prizes, and $3 million divvied up, I believe, as you said, three ways. I like those odds, Hal. That's pretty close to being like 50-50 ticket odds.
But you
It's
have to
pretty
register.
good.
Did you register? You have to register.
I
Not
did register. I
okay.
did
There you
register,
go.
and I decided it. In the interest of journalism, I had to register, and I'll write about my fabulous life if I win. But
$1 million. I mean, that's like a whole year's salary for you. So that's not bad,
oh well, yeah,
right?
goodness.
Okay, let's talk about the Senate elections now. In kind of a weird quirk, Tyler, Alberta's had Senate elections since 1989, but now they're not binding, but two senators got seats via this process?
Yeah, it's a very strange process. So basically, the way it works in the Senate is that when a vacancy comes in, the prime minister of the time will pick and appoint someone who maybe sort of has similar ideological leanings to themselves, someone who's an eminent citizen or scholar or lawyer or indigenous activist or some other profession, and put them in the Senate. But there has long been concerns that the Senate is unelected and therefore unaccountable. So Alberta has this process in place where you can basically vote to nominate someone for the Senate. So the two senators from Alberta that have gone through this and are in the Senate are Doug Black and Scott Tanis. Of course, there are other senators from Alberta who did not go through the nominee process, Paula Simons from Edmonton being the one that jumps to mind. Now, as you said, it's not binding because that's just sort of not how the Constitution works at the moment. So there will be people's names on the ballots. You can, select them, and then they will be nominees. And then it'll sort of be up to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau whether or not he chooses to pick the appointees that Albertans nominated or whether he doesn't. Stephen Harper, for example, I believe appointed Doug Black when he had been nominated. So can happen, non-binding. And at the moment, I believe there's only two candidates, and one of them is Erica Barudis, who was the past president of the UCP, and the other is Duncan Kinney, who is a sort of left-wing progressive activist here in the province.
2 years in, and the anti-Alberta Energy Inquiry has finally asked for responses from around 40 different groups. Now, the groups were not named, but they've been asked to respond to potential findings and to keep the information hush-hush until the report is released.
The suspense, like there's not that much drama in politics some days, but man, this thing feels like it's been going on forever. It's had four extensions. The budget has gone up by about $1 million to $3.5 million, but they're getting somewhere. They're finally getting somewhere. Hal, they've sent out sort of requests for comment, perhaps as like a journalist would, and they're waiting to hear back. I believe the deadline to respond is mid-July. July 16th is what's jumping up in my mind. So two things we'll have to watch for, I would say. The first being whether or not any of these organizations leak information to the media. The second is then what the timeline for actually seeing this report is going to be and what its findings are. Of course, the New Democrats have long sort of decried this as a waste of money, a waste of resources, an anti-democratic attack on dissent and things like that. The UCP says it's going to get to the bottom of some pretty important questions. But after these delays, it's whatever you think of it, it'll be nice to finally see what comes of this thing, I think.
Absolutely. Bring this chapter to a close. The Western premiers met virtually last week. Now, they talked about Canada health transfers, reopening the economies, but there was also a discussion, Tyler, surrounding reconciliation and searches for grave sites at former residential schools.
As I mentioned off the top, there has been sort of this discussion around the country about what to do about these residential school sites and searches. So that was part of the discussion. It's sort of the perennial, of course, demand from territorial and provincial premiers that there be more money in the Canada Health transfer. So they did talk about that. Of course, in the context of Prime Minister Trudeau going to Europe for the G7 meeting, perhaps what's notable here is that the premiers met virtually. They weren't all in the same room, although I believe it was hosted, quote unquote, in Nunavut. But a little bit of business as normal. It's a clearing of the horizon, I guess, when politicians can get back to complaining about the Canada Health transfer, I think.
Now, the temperature is not only heating up outside, but also inside of the legislature. Premier Jason Kenney was recently called a liar on a niqab ban. The NDP were called hobgoblins, and Justice Minister Casey Medu says NDP leader Rachel Notley is fake, phony, and deceptive. Tyler, it's grade school all over again.
It sure is, and tempers are flaring with the outdoor with the heat, I guess, and that's exactly it. There was this sort of nasty Twitter exchange that with a couple staffers and the former premier and Casey Medu, and just escalated very, like, clearly tensions are high, and there's important issues in front of people, and Kenney either did lie or certainly misunderstood the question or misspoke on that particular query. But it is, to back up a little bit, I mean, it's a big step often right off the bat for a politician to call another politician a liar. And I do think we've seen some sort of political change on that front, actually, especially since Donald Trump was elected. But yeah, it's been ugly. It's been really ugly. And, you can't help but hope that summer's here. Go outside, enjoy yourselves, folks. There's better things to be doing than sitting and being mad on Twitter, I would say.
Let me ask you something. I mean, Jason Kenney mentioned that the Calgary Stampede's going to go ahead in a more limited capacity, but K-Days in Edmonton was canceled. How disappointed are people in Edmonton? Your big festival is gone this year.
Yeah, it's funny. I have never been a huge K-Days person, so I feel like I'm not that bummed about it. But yeah, there's a bunch of sort of big events around the province, I would say, that in theory could have gone ahead but aren't. The Ponoka Stampede, I think, has been canceled. Wow. And that usually starts on the Canada Day long weekend. In Edmonton as well, the folk festival, huge folk music festival, really big event every summer, they canceled that months ago now. Wow. And you can't help but wonder if they're kicking themselves a little bit over maybe a premature decision. So I think there's the Stampede, I think, sort of held out till the last minute, and are now going to be able to go ahead. But some of these other festivals that made the call earlier it's not going to happen, even though maybe it could have had they been a little bolder, perhaps.
And we're waiting to hear in Lethbridge about the Whoop Up Days, the big festival here in August as well, to see if that's going to go ahead. So that remains to be seen as well.
Mm-hmm. Normal's on its way, though.
Now, what about, let's talk a little sports here for just a moment. I know you love sports as much as I do. Edmonton Elks, the name. How well has it been received by a lot of the fans in Edmonton? Because I know a lot of people, true CFL fans, are like, come on, the Eskimos. Eskimos is gone, it's the Elks now, and you're going to have to deal with it.
I like it. I like it personally, and I have to say, I've actually seen more like hats and shirts and stuff out like this early on than I would have thought. Literally the day the announcement was made, I can't remember, grocery store maybe, or maybe I'd gone to pick up some food and I saw a guy in an Edmonton Elks hat. So, I think wow. It felt like there was enough time, between this discussion being started and the name being changed that people maybe had some time to adjust. But I haven't heard any significant drama over it. And maybe everyone's just relieved that it's not the Edmonton Rough Riders.
Could you imagine another Rough Rider team? That's hilarious.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Thanks again for joining us today from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal.